Hey there, this is James Carberry, founder of Sweetfish Media, and one of the co-hosts of this show. For the last year and a half, I've been working on my very first book. In the book, I share the three-part framework we've used as the foundation for our growth here at Sweetfish. Now, there are lots of companies that have raised a bunch of money and have grown insanely fast, and we've featured a lot of them here on the show. We've decided to bootstrap our business, which usually equates to pretty slow growth. But using the strategy outlined in the book, we're on pace to be one of Inc.'s fastest growing companies in 2020. The book is called Content-Based Networking: How to Instantly Connect with Anyone You Want to Know. If you're a fan of audiobooks like me, you can find the book on Audible, or if you like physical books, you can also find it on Amazon. Just search Content-Based Networking or James Carberry, Carbary, in Audible or Amazon, and it should pop right up. All right, let's get into the show.
Welcome to the B2B Growth Show. I am Carlos Hidalgo, CEO and co-founder of Vism CX and author of The Un-American Dream. Today, I have with me a rather new friend who I met a number of months ago, but have been absolutely thrilled to get to know and had a great time with her in Seattle recently. Was an incredible host. Berrak Sarikaya. Berrak is a writer, amplifier, speaker, and go-to-market strategist. Berrak, thanks for joining the B2B Growth Human-to-Human segment.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here.
Well, as I mentioned, you and I are relatively new friends. We met at Marketing Profs not all too long ago. And then as it happened, you played a heck of a host to us in Seattle. But tell the audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, your history or your passion for B2B, and kind of what you're up to lately.
Sure. So I am what I've been up to. So I call myself an amplifier. I am a go-to-market strategist. Content is my baby. People may be familiar with me through content marketing world and Marketing Profs. Those are kind of the networks and the industry conferences I've attended and spoken at the most. And my passion comes from really storytelling. So writing is where it all started for me. And then 10 years ago, I just kind of stumbled into this content marketing, social media, community, everything that we get to play around with. And I think since I'm a small business advocate, that's where the B2B really came into play. And I've worked on a plethora of projects, but the ones that always have my passion are the ones where I get to advocate and amplify and help other people tell their stories. So whether that's doing it through my work at Yesler as a go-to-market strategist with some of the clients that I'm working with, I'm not going to name drop, but I have worked with, people can look that up, but I've worked with companies, small to large, some of the larger tech companies that we're familiar with here in Seattle. And I think that it all comes down to, as much as I love B2B and B2C, what I have found is that no matter what the two is, whether it's business or consumer, it all comes down to the same tenets that I think that we're going to be talking about today. So that's really where kind of a overview of what I've been up to the past 15 years.
Well, awesome. I love the term amplifier, and especially as we tell stories. And we've both been in B2B for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I know we've talked about this a little bit off the air. I'm increasingly, to use a British term, gobsmacked at the content that seems to come out from so many brands that really is just god-awful. It's not compelling. It's not relevant. It is sterile. All of these things. How on earth, you mentioned some tenets, and so feel free to speak about that, but how on earth have we gotten so far away in B2B from being human in our content?
I think it has a lot to do with the fact that, so I think the internet and social media is fantastic. I think that they're great tools. And I think that, having a landscape that is full of competitors that are using the same tools, whether or not they're using it well, is a different story. I think that we've kind of gotten caught in this, put things out in a way that's fast, in a way that it's just bombard our audience with content. It doesn't matter if it's good or not. And I think depending on the size of your company, there are a lot of stakeholders that may not necessarily understand what it is that we as marketers are trying to accomplish. So we turn into kind of this execution arm, and we're just trying to churn out numbers and match, goals that are set, not necessarily with marketers' input. So I think one of the biggest issues that we have, that I'm seeing and that I'm advocating for, is the fact that as marketers, we have to be internal advocates for ourselves and the work that we do, and as a result, our audience, because we know what it is that they want to talk about. And, there's, of course, profits, and there's, job security and all of that. But I think that we've gotten so used to the churn that we don't take the time to really internally advocate and educate other stakeholders and breaking down those silos so they understand the strategy and the reason behind why we're pushing for more, as you said, humanized content.
Right. And so I love that you're talking about, hey, advocating for what we do, right? Advocating for ourselves. What I heard was our value. And I've talked to people about that, is saying, hey, look, you are the evangelist for your craft in your organization. I don't think we can just assume that people know what we do. So how does somebody go about that? Because I'm so tired of hearing marketers going, we want a seat at the table. It's like, well, then do something, right?
Then
Do
ask
something
for a
of
seat
value.
at the table.
Yeah, ask for that seat at the table, but also bring value to the table versus going, well, I've just been turned into an execution arm. I mean, am I wrong? Do we bear some responsibility for that as marketers?
Yeah, absolutely. We do. And I mean, I've done the same thing, and I'm at fault for this as well, because we just, sometimes we get so bogged down. And the biggest thing that I have found, and when I talk to people and when they ask me for advice, or, when I'm talking to my clients, is, okay, so, your goals as in marketing are different, and you want to understand, and you want to communicate that value, and you want to sit at the table. Well, then go find out what it is that other people need and what their goals are. Because the product marketer versus the engineer, I'm just kind of thinking, like, as a big company, like product marketer versus engineer versus CFO versus like customer service, like they all have different goals. Yes, we're serving the same customer, but they have internal goals that they're trying to do. They have different things that they're trying to communicate. So if you want to be an advocate, and if you want to have a seat at the table, and you want to provide value to those other people that are within your company, then go and talk to them and find out what their pain points are. The same way that we talk to our customers, in the same way we find out what their pain points are and what it is that they value, what they need. Look inwards and do the same thing for other people who do have a seat at the table, and then go, okay, so here's what I'm hearing. Here are pain points. Here are the ways that I can help you in the work that I do, and let's work together.
I love that. It's really aligning what we do to the needs of the business.
I was just going to say, that's I have a gift that I use in presentations, is like, you got to ladder up the business goals, and it's a kitten climb up a ladder, but it works.
Yeah, it does. And I think when I hear marketers saying, well, I have my goals are different. No, you're part of the business. If you want different goals, go start your own business.
Right.
So I love that. And I hope anybody who's listening really takes that to heart and says, okay, if I'm not aligned with the goals of the business, maybe I don't know what the business needs. That's the first way. So I want to shift gears now, because you've talked in the introduction, you talked about amplifying and storytelling. Storytelling to me is, right? You go back to ancient civilizations, and human beings our human race has existed on stories and tales and fables and lore and all those things. So I'm always intrigued by storytelling. What are brands missing? What are B2B brands missing in terms of making the story connect at a human level?
They make the story about them and not the customer. That's the biggest, and it all boils down to that. So there are different ways that people do it well and don't do it well, and depending on the company and the industry. But the biggest thing is, the common theme that I find in the failure of connection from B2B brands is, when, even in customer stories, even in case studies, we talk about how our product did XYZ, instead of saying, okay, here's what our customer needed, here were their struggles, and here's the value we brought. So it's not just about the numbers. Yes, the numbers are important. The X number of hours you save the company and X number of dollars you brought in profit, fantastic. But really get down to the root of the connection. Those numbers won't matter to another customer who's looking at vendors or who's looking at those case studies to go, okay, well, great, that doesn't differentiate you. Because another thing is that when it comes to storytelling, is that it creates that connection. I can look at 5 companies that have the same spec sheets, that are doing the same exact things the same way, and that are going to save me the same profit or whatever it is that I need. What I'm looking for is, can they tell my story? Are they going to do their values align with mine? Are they going to communicate with me and about me in a way that reflects my goals and values? And I think that's something that we're missing in B2B, is that the end user, even though it's a business, it's still an end user. It's still a customer that has values, and we need to make sure that we're connecting with those.
I think that's so important to talk about the end user, because I think sometimes in B2B, we think, well, we're selling to a business, we're selling to an account. And one of the things that I was even talking about yesterday with a colleague was saying, we are selling to people who feel, who emote, who have bad days, who have fears, who are frustrated. And like you said, I even like it even more, the value component. So how do you go about finding the values that a buyer has?
You talk to them.
Imagine that.
I know. I mean, honestly, like, I think you just have to talk to them. And I know that there are quotas and salespeople are under incredible pressure, and I'm not dismissing that at all. But I think we're not taking the time. And I think the reason that we're seeing, and I mean, I don't mean to get super technical, but we're seeing low conversions on communications and outreach and all of that, is because it's all cold. And cold calling and cold emails are that. They're cold.
Yeah.
So doing a little research, even before you have a communication, people put a lot of information out there and a lot of clues about themselves out there. So do a little digging, do a little understanding, maybe talk to, if you are familiar with other vendors that they work with that are not your competitors, that are serving that customer, maybe go talk to them and find out what you can. It's just talking. It's about information exchange. It's about really listening. We're really not doing that well. So yeah.
So why aren't we? It seems so. And I'm not trying to insult anybody, but it just seems like, gee, if I need to connect with you, so if Carlos wanted to connect with Berrak and find out what you're interested in, rather than guess, I would maybe pick up the phone. We met in DC a number of months ago. I was like, oh, hey, we're going to be in Seattle. Do you want to do drinks? So it's. But why don't we do that when we cross the threshold into our companies and realize we're trying to market to people? What's holding us back?
Quotas. It's quotas.
Okay.
It's numbers that are holding us back. And it's, and salespeople have to hit certain number of calls or outreach. Marketers have to hit vanity metrics that, on social media or emails or whatever it is that we're doing. And I don't want this to come across. I love data. I think that data is amazing. And I think that actually I just posted on LinkedIn about an hour before we talked about how data is really going to be, important. And a lot of B2B marketers actually need to get familiar with data and then analyzing it and seeing, actually pulling insights from it and telling that story from the data. But I think it's a double-edged sword, because if we're only bogged down in the numbers and the metrics and the quotas, but we're not looking at the bigger picture and the narrative behind that, then we're losing that opportunity to really connect. I would much rather have, 1,000 followers on Twitter that 50, 60% of the time they're all engaging with me versus, or 56% are engaging with me versus like 10,000 followers, but I get 2 likes in a tweet any given day. Like it's about the quality of the connection and the communication, I think. And it still goes back to our education as well. As marketers, we have a lot of insight that we really need to share with the other the other departments and the other people who are serving the same customer.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I like it. And I hope what I really hope is people are going, oh, okay, because what you just said about quotas is, I'm not saying, and I agree with you, I don't think quotas are a bad thing, but what we have to realize is that quotas cannot dictate what is behavior in terms of getting the most. We and I talk about this with execs all the time, and I believe you share the same view. Is, my God, we got to be patient. Like,
Mm-hmm.
marketing and getting a close up view of our customer is not an overnight endeavor, and we've got to make sure there's a difference between doing things right and doing things right now. And I see
Yeah.
so many companies saying, "Well, get it right now." That's not how it works.
Yeah. And especially in B2B, we know, and like research has shown even recently, the B2B customer lifecycle is long and it
Yeah.
involves multiple touch points. It involves multiple people that we need to convince. So that's where also use data to segment and personalize and make sure you're sending in, you're communicating at touch points that actually matter and that, you have a narrative that you're following in your communication. So yeah, like you said, and I had a client, I actually worked with a startup years ago and they were brand new and it was a great idea and I really loved it. But we had like a closed beta and we were building a video platform. And one of the engineers was just like, okay, well, we want Apple-like numbers at launch. I said, first of all, that's not how that works. Second of all, you don't have the budget for Apple-like numbers. And third of all, we're doing a private closed beta launch. Your
Right.
public launch is not going to be. So it was just setting the expectations, but that's what people expect is they see the big viral campaigns and they're great, but you don't have the budget. And even if you have the budget, your Apple-like numbers, what Apple-like means to you might be lower. It might not be one-to-one equivalent of the same number, but it could be scaling down and can reflect the same thing.
Well,
So I think
yeah.
yeah.
And to be clear, Apple didn't have Apple-like numbers when it first started either.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. They totally came out swinging, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, every brand starts day one as a unicorn. I mean, it's no surprise based on the conversations we've had, kind of your viewpoint on this. But I want to shift gears a little bit because when we were sitting in that amazing restaurant you took us to in Seattle, we started to talk about just being human and part of the human condition, and the word failure came up. If I recall, we were kind of talking about the un-American dream and some of the things that we had written in there. My wife has a chapter in it as well about some of our failings and where we screwed up. And you said, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm gonna use the word fascinated. Kind of fascinated with this idea of, everybody's got a failure story.
mm-hmm.
And everybody has this either learnings, but what I'm finding, and feel free to disagree, is that people are it's kind of like we know it, but now all of a sudden we're very hesitant to talk about it. But I want to get your take because it was really, for me, one of the highlights of the conversation we had over those few hours, and just kind of see what you're seeing in whether it's B2B or just business in general or
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurial or whatever around failure.
Yeah. So it's fascinating because I fail a lot, but
Welcome to
it's
the
not a bad
club.
thing. Yeah, I think so. It's fascinating to me, and this is something that came up a few years ago. I had an idea, and then I actually failed to follow through with it. But I'm hoping that I will be launching that interview series in 2020 about talking about failure and just to kind of. So I think there are kind of multiple ways to talk about this, but I think what I'm seeing, and this has kind of shifted over the past couple of years, people are talking about failure even as businesses, but they are putting a curated filter on it. So they're not talking about their failure until they can wrap it up in a nice little story, which great, that's fine. And, people talk about entrepreneurs and business owners and CEOs talk about, like the first launch or the first company that they launched that they failed, but they don't talk about it in the raw and gritty way. They don't talk about, they'll talk about their morning routines, but they don't talk about the morning that they actually fail to get up out of bed. they don't talk about the missed phone calls and the emails that they're missing because, they're so bogged down. And honestly, we're not talking about the human side effects of failure that actually impacts us every day, and the way that we deal with it and the way we manage it. And when it comes to businesses, and obviously, I don't think anybody should be giving away state secrets when it comes to their business. And I know it's a fine line, but I think we want to see more of that transparency behind the scenes. Like when something goes wrong, when a server goes down, we don't want the silence of like, hey, we'll figure it out and let you know. And then 10 hours go by and we're still frustrated. We want to understand what's going on in the back end. We want to know, hey, here's how our business is dealing it. Here's our process for it. Here's what we found. And then tell us about the learnings. And, and if you need to have it as a narrative and tie it to something else, don't tie it to your product, please, but tie it to 3 things we learned when our server went down for 10 hours, and here's how much profit we lost, and here's what we're going to do better. So that's the business side of it. But when it comes to the entrepreneur and human and just people, the narrative around failure it's glossed over. Even if we even talk about it, it's glossed over. It's templatized. We're putting it in a blog format that is tied up in a neat little bow, and we have the perfect learnings. Sometimes you fail, you screw up, and you don't learn anything from it. And we need to talk about those too. Like it's not always going to be some grand life lesson that you're learning. Sometimes I failed at following up email and it cost me like XYZ, and okay, you know what? I failed and that was it. And here's what I'm going to do better next time. But you don't have to have not everything has to turn into a perfect quote graphic that you're going to send out with your link to your blog post. So I think that's where.
Yeah, I like that. And I like even, I think the brand I'm when you talked about the server going down, I thought of, the collective fetal position that everybody went into on Thanksgiving when Facebook and Instagram were having their outages. And I remember saying to my wife, I said something about, oh, I guess they're down. I said, I feel bad for the people who are now being called in those companies to fix this on Thanksgiving Day.
Right.
That's where my head went. I haven't heard anything else from either of from Facebook about why they went out or anything. But wouldn't that make a brand so much more human? I mean, failure, again, as I said, it's part of the human condition. I would love for an organization to go, hey, yeah, we're really sorry about this. Here's what happened, and here's the steps that we've taken. Why aren't brands taking those opportunities? And we'll talk about the entrepreneur in a minute. But why aren't brands taking those opportunities to become more human?
Because I think, I don't know about Facebook. Facebook might be like a weird example, but I think one thing might be, and I'm not super familiar with, process with shareholders and all of that, but I'm sure their processes and legal blockers and all of that set in place for larger companies like that, which I think they need to have a crisis communications plan that also builds in humanity to it. But when it comes to smaller companies, I think there's that fear of looking weak, and there's that fear of following their customers losing faith in them. And that I lose faith more in companies when they don't tell me what happened and there's no transparency, because then I won't know if 5 days or 5 weeks or 5 months down the line that's going to happen again. So I think it's the fear of being vulnerable. I think there's probably legal stuff happening on the back end, which obviously it is, but and it's probably a lack of having good crisis communications plan in place to factor in the humanity to external communications.
Yeah, that you just used a word that can strike fear into the best of us: vulnerability. And when you think about, so shifting to the entrepreneur, the individual, to get really raw in how you failed, the mistakes you made. I mean, you're really at that point kind of going, yep, I'm just going to lay it all bare. That's a scary proposition. But again, all of us have a story of immense failure in our lives. If you don't, you haven't lived long enough. um, but again, you mentioned this interview series. I'm curious, like in your experience, and as you've kind of prepped for this, and even talked to some folks about it, like what's holding us back in that?
I think a pattern's going to emerge as I talk to more people, but I think it really goes down to the root of, and this is going to get super real for people when I start talking to them about it, but what your first exposure to failure was as a kid, and how, culture, like family culture, where you were, where you grew up. I think that the definition of failure and the concept of failure varies across cultures, as we know. And it's definitely a matter of how it was received and how it was communicated to you when you were a kid, and how that evolved as you met other people and as you were exposed to different people in your life and in your first job and things like that. And I think it's an evolution that really, the root of it is really in how you were exposed to failure as a kid and at your first job and things like that. And I think that really takes hold in our psyche, and that will eventually shape how we define failure in our business.
So that whole, and I'm a big believer in this, getting back to that inner child, right? Which we never really outgrow. We just grow older and grayer and those things. So I love that you're tapping into that aspect of it, and that cultural aspect of it. It's really just goes back to so much of family of origin. And then I would throw in, and I want your feedback on this. And my friend Tim Washer has said this: the one thing that unites all 7 billion plus of us is shame. And I believe that one of the reasons we don't like to talk about our failings at any kind of raw, vulnerable, authentic way is because that voice of shame can roar so loud. Are you finding that in some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the voice of shame is the loudest thing in my head most of the time. And yeah, I think you summed it up really well. And I've actually, that's exactly why Tim is on my list of people I'm going to interview. He doesn't know that yet, but he can find out when he listens to this. And I actually met Tim for the first time when we met in DC as well. So he's such a fantastic human. But
yes, he is.
Yeah, shame, and I think if we get into it, there's the whole bullying aspect of it, and the way we've all been bullied in our lives in different aspects, and social media and internet has definitely amplified it in some ways and has also brought out our humanity in others. But I think it's just a matter of redefining and reconditioning an entire generation. This is not going to be something that's conditioned out of us that quickly, but I think how we deal with it and how we manage it as a society is definitely something that can evolve if enough people are talking about it.
Well, I love it. I'm excited that you're going to do that. I would definitely add Washer to the list. You're exactly right. He is a great human. He's a good friend. And I think he'll have a lot to offer. Berrak, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know you're extremely busy to be on the show. I think your insights are great. I'm a big fan. So thanks for taking the time. Thanks for sharing your insights. And please keep everybody updated on the interview series, because I think it'll be fascinating. And I think as much as we as human beings don't like to talk about it, I think we're actually drawn to vulnerability in a very interesting way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for having me. This has been super fun to talk about, and it's definitely vulnerable of me to talk about things that I'm working on. So it's been nice full circle.
Well, the cat's out of the bag now. Hey, in closing, where can people follow up? Where can they find you? Where can they connect with you?
They can just find me. The easiest is probably on Twitter, Berrak Biz. Berrak Biz all over the place. BERRAKBIZ. And yeah, just find me, follow me, connect with me. If you're interested in being interviewed, I'm not just interviewing marketers. It's going to be actually all walks of life in different industries and different, I have a couple of active friends that I have lined up. So if you're interested, and even if you're not a marketer, or if you know someone who's super interesting, has a great story to tell, you should come find me.
That sounds awesome. Well, thanks again, Berrak. It was a pleasure. Look forward to the next time we can have a chat in person. This is a wrap for this segment of the B2B Growth Human to Human segment podcast. Thanks to Berrak Sarikaya for being our guest. And again, I am Carlos Hidalgo, author of The Un-American Dream. Everybody have a great day.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.